Hello again, I am Fluff, and today we're back on War Thunder Ground Forces, about which unsurprisingly balanced discussions have started cropping up left, right and centre. Some more considered, and other ones quite simply X is OP because it killed me. In the case of the former, and beta actually being beta, the various feedback and rustled up historical documents and all that sort of good stuff is quite useful, and potentially helpful to how the game turns out as a finished product. But enough of the blah blah blah, what's going on balance wise in ground forces at the moment then? Well, among the overarching concerns, tank spawns are a big thing, notably the fact that heavy tanks get one spawn whereas mediums and TDs get two, with a couple of exceptions like the premium Jagdpanther. And this ostensibly makes some deal of sense, I suppose, in that heavy tanks can be extreme game changers. A embedded Tiger tank playing smart can be incredibly difficult to deal with. I've had the dubious pleasure of pinging several rounds off a Tiger in that kind of position because the driver knew what he was doing and only gave me the very edge of his turret to shoot at. I promptly gave up and went a different way. This was in a T-34-85, and though I was helpless in this particular situation, there have been plenty of times where I haven't been. Of course, it doesn't always pan out like this, and sometimes heavy tanks get flanked and other times they just get unlucky from good ranged shooting by an enemy player, and so on and so forth. The crucial thing is, once that heavy tank driver is gone, he's gone. He doesn't have another respawn. And this, combined with a couple of other factors, ends up meaning that arguably heavy tanks are just not as desirable in the fight. The main other factor is the fact that medium tanks get access to artillery, and artillery is useful in game for two functions. Its first is the obvious one: you can call down a strike, which can, if not destroy the opponent that you're trying to get at, can force him to displace from his position to a new one that's more inferior maybe, so that it's easier for you to shoot him, or just renders him less of a threat to you. The second function of the artillery lies with its camera, which gives you essentially an on-call improved situational awareness ability, enabling you to check your surroundings from a higher vantage point whenever you like, such that you can see enemy tanks while using it that you wouldn't be able to see when not using it. It's quite a nice little bonus as a medium tank to be able to sit behind a hill, activate the artillery camera and know that there is a guy waiting for you on the other side, instead of cresting the hill to find out the hard way. In practice, this means you see a lot more medium tanks than heavies for the most part in each match, but I'm not entirely convinced that's a bad thing. I do think, however, that because medium tanks get two spawns, they probably don't also need artillery. This entire issue does seem to be tied in quite closely with the whole beta is beta thing, though. For instance, as always, damage models have been an issue. Think along the lines of gun mantlets being modelled incorrectly or just non-existent. Combine that with the ungodly accuracy of the tank guns themselves, and you've got a recipe for why is my heavy tank made of paper, even when I'm duking it out from a kilometre away with an opponent who shouldn't be able to get through my armour there. That these issues exist is something I learned very quickly. I'll give you an example. Several times now I've been able to destroy a Tiger in situations where I don't really think I should have been able to in a T-34, simply because I've ended up hitting his driver's viewport. Evidently it does count as a weak spot. However, if you go onto the forums, you'll find out that this thing was an armoured contraption which would probably have been lowered while the Tiger was fighting, precisely to avoid that kind of thing happening. In game, this results in situations where your extremely heavily armoured vehicle is taken out suddenly and relatively unexpectedly if you haven't been running your tank for long, simply because your opponent was able to accurately place a shot at 800 meters directly into a tiny little Death Star vent weak spot that you have. Of course, observations on the heavy tank's abilities aren't really helped by the kind of gung-ho drivers that we tend to see who attempt to lead the charge and then promptly die. Because who knew that trying to track a medium tank at point blank range as he circles you is difficult and likely to get you killed. I imagine as tiers 3 plus start to fill out with more and more players, we'll get to see a better representation of how this is going to pan out when you've got a full entire team on either side instead of like the 6 to 12 that tends to be the norm at the moment. A final sort of broad non-specific concern is the efficacy of high explosive shells at wrecking people's cannon barrels. It seems to be that firing high explosive shells at an opponent head-on at his turret is resulting in a sort of, I suppose, disproportionate amount of cannon barrel knockouts. And while you can understand an armor-piercing round from the side knocking out a cannon barrel, a simple high explosive shell going off just underneath it, maybe not so much. Those cannon barrels really aren't light little twigs that are going to get snapped by that sort of thing. We'll just forget about the 152 for now. He won't be coming back for 30 seconds anyway. For more specific balanced stuff, I'm pretty sure anyone who's playing ground forces at the moment is well aware of the perception of the T-50 and the Panzer IV F2. That is already old ground that is being constantly retrodden. I thought I'd mention a couple of tanks that stood out for me so far. The first being the T-34-57, not the premium one, which stood out negatively for me. It was quite a painful tank to get through, although I was playing it before they tweaked its ammunition. So it may well be that the problem I had, where you could penetrate anything, you just couldn't damage it, might not be an issue anymore. But at the time, that aspect of its weaponry, combined with the relative fragility of the tank overall, made it so very tedious to play. That tank is possibly the absolute essence and exemplar of a vehicle which you absolutely must drive with a view to no head-on confrontations whatsoever. And the very second you enter one of those situations, you need to run away. The other tanks that stood out for me were actually tank destroyers, the Jagdpanzer 38T Hetzer, but more the Panzer 470. The Panzer 470 has got quite a few people's jimmies rustled at the moment, and certainly if you can get set up in that tank with a nice narrow lane for your enemies to funnel into, then you are going to make them suffer. And it may be that it does have bugged armor, but it also isn't completely invincible from the front. It can be penetrated, it's just a case of you're probably going to need very high penetration ammunition. The other aspect of it is, if you let anyone get off to one side of you, you're dead. Simple as, unless you can get the thing turned around. Playing as Germans, I absolutely loved it. Playing as Russians, once I got the T-34-85 models, still don't like going anywhere near its front, but not nearly as bad as it was when I was facing it in earlier vehicles. Now, though I do have thoughts on quite a few of the other tanks, I've also rushed through my progress fairly quickly to get what I wanted, so I wouldn't say I've got the best idea of how they really perform, aside from the fact that the Panzer 38T, the first one, is an absolute badass. And what I will probably do now is return to Tier 1 and just start the process of acing tanks to get a really good feel for all of them. That will be all from me for now then, so thank you for watching. If you've got any thoughts on the tank balance at the moment that you'd like to share, please feel free and go ahead. But until next time, from me, take care.